today. So my name is Margaret Wallace Brown, and I am the Director of the Planning and Development Department. And I want to welcome all of you here today to the first step in our Equity Indicators program that we're working on. This project is a partnership between the Mayor's Office of Resilience and Sustainability, the Mayor's Office of Complete Communities, and the Planning and Development Department, as well as the Kinder Institute for Urban Research. We have an amazing crowd with us today, and I have asked all of you to join us because you represent organizations that have programs or affect policy on a citywide basis, or some in local communities. And then you are data experts. You know your community and the data that your community uses daily to do its good work. And so we want to get your support for this initiative and your input on the direction we take it. Today, we're going to learn why the project is so important and how it can help us achieve our vision of Houston as a city that offers opportunity for all, and how you and all Houstonians can participate in developing the program. I'd like to introduce to you our partners, Priya Zachariah, the city's Chief Resilience and Sustainability Officer. If she can turn her camera on and wave. Shannon Buggs, the Director of the Mayor's Office of Complete Communities. Shannon. We are also joined today by Lynn Henson, our Division Manager in the Planning and Development Department, who is the power behind Let's Talk Houston and some of the work we'll be doing as a group. So we are thrilled that Mayor Turner could join us for a few moments today, and so I am not going to waste any more of yours or his time introducing him. You know him, and I'm going to hand this over to him and let him start off with a few words. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Director, and I appreciate your leadership in this effort as well, and to everyone else that's a part of this program for today. And look, I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us. And I understand everyone is busy during the holiday season, and I appreciate each of you for adding to this conversation and adding this event on your schedules. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of equity, and I really want to underscore the importance of equity and applying it to how the city of Houston functions and grows. I don't care what we do, whether it's in Resilient Houston, the Climate Action Plan, Complete Communities, whatever programs we're putting in place, if equity is not at the center, if equity is not at the table, then we are missing the mark. There are deep disparities, within our city, the division of wealth, the unequal accessibility to opportunities, the inconsistent availability of necessities that have been exacerbated by racial, ethnic, gender, and ability biases. And we can't continue to let Houston be content with being two cities, one for the haves and the other for the have-nots. So equity is a lens we must use to assess and adjust city policies and procedures so that all residents have the opportunity to thrive. And equity cannot be an afterthought in our city now or in the future. And so I am incredibly proud of all the work this administration has done to foster equity in projects across all sectors of the city. The Complete Communities Initiative, led by Shannon Buggs, has worked and continues to work across private, public, and nonprofit sectors to revitalize and foster investment in 10 of Houston's most historically under-resourced and neglected neighborhoods. As an example, this past year, we kicked off the renovation work that will transform the former Bethune Academy into the Bethune Empowerment Center, a workforce development hub in Acres Home, which we affectionately refer to as the FOFO. Resilient Houston strategy continues to provide individuals, communities, institutions, and businesses the resources they need to survive, recover, and improve through natural disasters, pandemics, and any other shocks and stressors our city may experience. And we know in the last 6 years, we have experienced a lot of them. Resilient Houston's policy recommendations focus on our most vulnerable populations and neighborhoods because these are the residents who need our help the most during difficult times. They take it literally on the chin. The Houston Climate Action Plan, released on Earth Day 2020, focuses on reducing greenhouse gas emissions throughout the Houston. The Office of Resilience and Sustainability, being led by Priya Zachariah, is developing clean energy solutions and optimization, improving waste management, and increasing availability to clean transportation. Evolve Houston, a nonprofit derived from the Climate Action Plan, is prioritizing equitable electric vehicle education, infrastructure, and investments to ensure that no community is left behind as we transition to Houston's future of clean electric transportation. And one of the most prominent symbols of that transformation will be when Sunnyside in Southeast Houston, one of the complete communities, becomes the home to the largest urban solar farm in the nation by winning state approval to convert a landfill that's been closed for 50 years into sun fuel energy producing power plant. And that will truly be transformative for Sunnyside. My Health Equity Response Task Force has prioritized equitable COVID vaccine distribution and education into Houston's most economically distressed and socially vulnerable neighborhoods. But even when all of that has been accomplished and planned for the immediate future, we still have a long road and many conversations ahead of us. So finally, as we need all of us at the table for these conversations, and as you can see from the broad list of stakeholders that are engaging with and will continue to engage with us, we need your input and your participation. So once again, I want to thank you for your time and your commitment to making Houston a more just and equitable city by solidifying equity into the daily operations of our city now. We lay the foundation of fairness that will not erode over time. And I'm confident that we can make great changes together. So we don't want to be a city of two in one. We do want to be one city that rises all together. So thank you so very much, and I appreciate your participation. Happy holidays too.
Thank you, Mayor Turner.
Okay, so I think the next thing on our agenda, I'm supposed to hand this off to Shannon and Priya, who will lead us through the rest of the discussion.
Yes, up next is Priya.
Priya, you're on mute.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Mayor, thank you for those very inspiring remarks. Director Wallace Brown, yes, I'm available to present the next couple of slides, and I'll be passing those on to Director Bugs. So I wanted to take a couple of minutes to just lay out to all of you our ongoing efforts as the City of Houston to improve equity. So in the past 6 years, the city has taken numerous strides to make Houston a more equitable and just city. And those include Plan Houston, the city's high-level general plan that envisions Houston as a city that offers opportunity to all. It includes Rising Together, a roadmap to confront inequity. It includes the Complete Communities plan that Mayor Turner was referencing. It includes both the Resilient Houston as well as the Climate Action Plan, for which we are entering a new phase of continued and expedited implementation. It includes Vision Zero, the Mayor's Health Equity Response Task Force, as well as a methodology in the Resilient Infrastructure Diversity and Equity Scorecard, which helps us allocate resources in the most under-resourced neighborhoods when it comes to infrastructure planning. Next slide, please. So I want to spend a few minutes and just lay out how we have been thinking about resilience within the resilience and sustainability framework. So when the Resilient Houston Plan was done, it started with the definition of what is urban resilience. And I'm really proud to say that Houston took the definition of resilience a step further than what is traditionally understood. Many times cities think of resilience as a response to climate resilience, or the impacts of climate. change and the necessity to respond to that. But in the case of Houston, we acknowledge that urban resilience is the capacity of individuals, communities, institutions, businesses, and systems within an urban area to survive, adapt, and thrive, no matter what kinds of chronic stresses and acute shocks they experience, which is to say that we acknowledge that not only are cities and neighborhoods and communities made vulnerable because of climate risks, but they're also made vulnerable because of social and economic inequalities, which compound their exposure and their ability to recover and transform when exposed to climate risks, and also the exposure to risks that are outside of the climate spectrum. For instance, the pandemic has been an example of that, or cyber attacks. And so Resilient Houston really defines resilience in a broad sense that places equity at the center of that definition. Next slide, please. So talking specifically about how we address the question of equity within Resilient Houston, there are some specific goals as well as actions that we are advancing today by the work that we are here to discuss and deliberate on, starting today and for the next few months. So goal 12, which is within the Resilient Houston framework, is that we will advance equity and inclusion for all. And specifically how those translate into actions is action 39. So for your reference, if you're not aware, these are available on our website. The entire Resilient Houston plan, as well as the climate action plan, are both available for reference and download. So this is action 39, where we want to promote equity through citywide policies and programs. And part of that work is to develop and adopt an equity atlas and framework, establish a framework where we can discuss equity indicators, set up the program for equity indicators, as well as a tracking system, and ultimately create an equitable policy analysis approach. So by our discussion today and by the participation of our stakeholders and community engagement, we are advancing specific goals that have been written into the Resilient Houston framework. And with that, I'm happy to hand it over to Director Buggs. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Zachariah. Hi, everyone. I am Shannon Buggs, Director of the Mayor's Office of Complete Communities. And I also thank you for being part of today's conversation. I truly appreciate the remarks of Mayor Turner, Director Wallace Brown, Chief Zachariah, about getting us started in this conversation on equity. For me, one of the main takeaways from their comments was that they kept saying equity. And I want to make sure that we're all clear on what we're talking about regarding equity and not confusing it with equality. When defined and practiced with justice in mind, we know that those two words, equity and equality, are not synonymous. And so we have been using in our internal conversations to prepare for today, a definition of equity that is in its simplest terms as it relates to the issues around racial and social justice. A word that means meeting communities where they are and allocating resources and opportunity as needed to create equal outcomes for all community members. We have a very broad definition of equity in our Resilient Houston strategy that was the starting point for this work, and that is what Chief Zachariah was referencing in her remarks. But we also knew that we needed to help to further define for people what all of this means in terms of some of the more challenging parts of the conversation around equity, which has related back to social justice and racial equity. So, and also we've been using as a definition of equality, that equality means that each individual or group of people is given the same resources and opportunities regardless of their circumstances. And when we're talking about through the lenses of racial and social justice, equality is actually something that can increase inequities in communities, as not every group of people needs the same resources or opportunities allocated to them in order to thrive. That you have to be very specific about how you are addressing the disparities and bringing that specificity into your approach to addressing those disparities and eliminating them. So for this, we are saying that the difference between equity and equality and how we've been thinking about it and preparing for today is that equity recognizes each person has different circumstances and needs, And therefore, different groups of people need different resources and opportunities allocated to them in order to thrive. And that equality is giving everyone the exact same resources across the board, regardless of individuals or groups of people's actual needs or opportunities and resources that are already provided to them. So I hope that helps to set the framework for where we are in this conversation. We have the classic example in front of you of what equity looks like versus equality, that you would give everybody the exact same little box to look over the fence to see the ball game. And everybody can't see because everybody is not of the same height. And then equity is that the tallest person would maybe be able to stand on their own and be able to see the game, whereas the next person in height needs some assistance, and the smallest person needs the most assistance. So the person who has had the least ability to see gets the most help. So that is how we have been defining it, but we wanted to make sure that you all were back on the same page with us. We also know that the city of Dallas and St. Louis and other cities have also tackled the same work in addressing specifically equity through a racial lens. And Dallas is defining equity as fairness and justice and outcomes for and treatment of groups of people. Equity, unlike equality, takes into account histories and the unique needs of people based on their identities or social circumstances. And St. Louis did in a shorter statement, with racial equity as a state in which race no longer predicts outcomes. So we're using those as some guiding lights in this conversation, and we hope that you will be able to engage with us further on that. If you'll go to the next slide. This is where we are, we have, as a city, been engaging in this work, not just internally, but also with the in partnership with other cities through the National League of Cities. And we have a cohort of folks that have been addressing racial equity through various lenses and on different projects. And this is a visual of the theory of change that we've been using to guide that work. The vision for it says all city residents, particularly those historically excluded, have fair and equitable access to the resources and opportunities for good health and well-being, and to shape vibrant and inclusive communities. And then along that semicircle half-sun image are different approaches that have been used. Laura Patino, who is the deputy director in Chief Zachariah's office, the mayor's office of Resilience and Sustainability. We just had a merger of the two offices, so excuse me for stumbling a little bit on the name, but she's been leading that work with us and has been doing a tremendous job in how we are going to be using this particular lens around stormwater drainage infrastructure and how we apply that to communities that have been economically distressed and socially vulnerable for a very long time. So we won't go too far into that today. There's a lot that can be unpacked about it, but that is the work that we've been doing. Next slide, please. And this is the equity charge that's in the Resilient Houston strategy. I know all of you are well versed in the Resilient Houston strategy, but if not, you know we can get you the link to the website. I won't take the time to read all of it, but it is very, very inclusive of everyone that has experienced challenge in our country around bias that is related to something that's intrinsic to who they are. And so we know that this work is not just about making sure that we are adjusting how the city functions in terms of seeing where it has bias against folks because of race or gender or ability or sexual orientation and all of that. We have an entire charge that looks at all of it. But in this work, we have been particularly focused on making sure that some of the more thornier parts of this that have not been easily addressed in public conversation have been elevated to the top. And so that is where we are coming from with the move to look at this work through a social justice lens and centering racial equity in the conversation around general equity. Next slide. And is this where I'm supposed to, I think I still do this part, correct, Lynn?
Yes, Director Bugs.
So this is our grand work of getting to a working definition for the city of Houston on what equity is. And so this is what we are presenting to you all today and are looking for your feedback and comments on. And for a product of all of the work that we've been doing, we have a statement that equity is achieved when a Houstonian's race, ethnicity, disability, or sexual orientation does not predict their outcome, limit their choice, or access to opportunity. Next slide. And we have also come with a commitment that the city of Houston will do all of these things listed in order to make that definition a reality for life in our city. And Lynn, I do believe that the next slide goes to someone else.
Yes, I'll take the next slide. So what are equity indicators? Equity indicators is a tool that was developed by the City University New York Institute for State and Local Governance. This tool was developed to help cities understand and measure equality or equity in their city. Once developed for a city, equity indicators help measure the disparities faced by disadvantaged groups. So the data is analyzed in a way that will help produce an overall score for the city. So for the city of Houston, we will get a grade. The data in the score can be tracked over time. And the goal for this initiative is to support policy development, demonstrating the effectiveness of current policies and initiatives, and also highlighting areas where new policies and initiatives may be needed. The methodology behind equity indicators comes from CUNY. They developed not only the indicators, but the methodology in partnership with the Rockefeller Foundation. Because of this work, there are currently 6 cities that have equity indicators. They include Dallas, Texas, New York City, Oakland, California, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, and Tulsa. And we're creating equity indicators for Houston, and we need your support and guidance as stakeholders. I do want to mention that the Shell Foundation is providing funding here in Houston for the work that we're doing here. So the framework is represented by this graphic that you see on the screen. In the CUNY methodology, there are 4 levels, and each one of the levels rolls up to the level above it. The indicators are at the base. These are the sets of data that get to the specific disparity that's experienced, the things that we're actually measuring. The indicators roll up into topics. Topics are, you can think about it like the content or the what that describes the category or the stories that we're trying to tell. The topics roll up into themes, and the themes are broad categories. Think of the overall concept or the big picture for an area. And the themes roll up to provide the city's overall equity score. Within this framework and model, there is an equal number of indicators per topic and an equal number of indicators, equal number of topics per each theme. And this is done on purpose so that each indicator and topic has an equal weight within the framework. Some data examples can come from sources that include the census data. census data, for example, will have data based on ethnicity or home ownership. Data may also come from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics when we look at unemployment rate. Or it could include something that would be represented on a map as an image file, such as the urban tree canopy. Example indicators can include things like, so thinking broad again, the themes being the broad overarching topic, you may think that you feel in economic development is an area where there is inequity. Under that theme, there will be 4 specific areas for economic development. In those topic areas, one of them might be, for example, employment. And looking at the topic of employment, there will be at least 3 measures within employment. One of them, for example, might be the actual unemployment rate. Based on the CUNY model, ratios are calculated, and that ratio is converted into an equity score using an algorithm that was derived by City University, New York. The equity scores are on a 100-point scale, so think of grade school. 100 represents the highest possible score, and a 1 would represent the lowest possible score. The data that makes each indicator needs to be collected on a regular basis so that we can compare progress. It also needs to be measurable based on ethnicity. And we'll go more into this once we really dive deeply into the indicators. And they also need to be able to be interpreted like based on a positive or a negative change. The Kinder Foundation has been very instrumental in looking at various sets of data in order to develop an initial list. I want to acknowledge Jay Wu on the call. She's the Director of Research and Operations for the Kinder Institute for Urban Research, as well as Sarah Diaz, who is the Senior Research Analyst at Kinder as well. They're very experienced in data analysis, and they will help us conduct the analysis for Houston's equity indicators. We want your comments on the indicator list that has been compiled thus far and seek your comments. So I'll talk a little bit more about how we can get your comments later in the presentation. Public engagement. We feel that public engagement is very important in this process, and it is a part of the CUNY model. We have begun conversations with departmental resilience officers. Those are representatives from each department that will play a role in providing comments on the indicators in the process. We've shared with them an early draft and have received some feedback from them. Those of you that are here with us today, the stakeholders, we want to work with you. We recognize that you work and serve many of the communities that experience inequity, and your input is extremely important. We will share the list of indicators with you prior to our next meeting. That meeting is currently scheduled for Friday, January 7th. At that meeting, we'll go really in depth into what those indicators are, what they mean, how we'll use them, and go into a larger discussion about them. For those that may not be able to attend or would like to provide comments after that meeting, we will make a survey available online so that you can provide comments via that survey. Our goal is to receive feedback from all of the stakeholders prior to making the survey public to the general, open to the general public. In order to have a robust response from the community, we also need your support in getting the word out about this process. Many of you have a constituency that you work with, and we'd love to be able to have as many people from the city of Houston participate in providing input. Our public engagement plans. So we will distribute the survey citywide with your assistance, and that survey will be conducted through letstalkhouston.org. That's our online engagement tool. But we realize that not everybody has access to the internet, or not everyone has a smartphone, or maybe there are individuals that don't have a computer at home. And so for those with limited access, we will conduct paper surveys as well. We feel that it's important to capture Houston's history as it relates to equity. And the final website will include a historical timeline, storytelling, and videos. We'd like your guidance identifying historical facts to be included and candidates to be interviewed. On the screen are a list of the deliverables that we will have at the end of all of this hard work. Establishing this program will take several months, and at the end, we expect to have an equity definition. We will also have our final list of indicators, as well as the atlas, the entire website, and a dashboard. This will be with this dashboard and website, individuals will be able to see the data and see the data in a mappable format, as well as be able to learn about the history in Houston and access the videos. The timeline, we're in December. We're starting with our first stakeholder engagement meeting. In January, we'll reach back out to you for another stakeholder engagement. Have you fill out the survey and provide comments. And by the end of January, open the public survey to the public, to the general public. We'd like your continued assistance in February as we refine different pieces of the website. And at that point, the atlas and website development work will begin. We'll work very closely with the Kinder Institute in order to provide the information, the equity score, and the mapping tools that will be available online. Between February and May, all of this good work will be going on behind the scenes, and we would like to make an official launch in May. I want to stop there for a moment and ask if there are any questions before we move on. Our next step will be...
Lynn?
Yes.
So in looking at the definition that you placed under consideration, the wording mentions community and people. Well, no, the discussion before you showed it mentioned community and people, but the wording only addresses people. So how do you incorporate communities in this concept of a definition of equity?
That's a very good question. And I've changed the slide that you see is the current equity indicators definition that we are working with. Is this the same definition that you're referring to?
Yes. So when a Houstonians, which would denote person,
Mhm.
how does that then equate to community, which may be a combination of ethnicities, races, etc.?
Um, let me take a second just to also read out loud Houston's commitment. In creating this definition, lots of work was done. There were several versions, lots of discussion. This one sentence grew really long and became a page. And so we worked to try to shape that definition to a shorter statement, but we didn't want to lose all of the additional information. So that was placed in this Houston's commitment. So let me read that as well. An individual's zip code, race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, social class, physical abilities or attributes, religious or ethical value system, national origin, linguistic ability, or immigrant status should not limit their choices, opportunity, and freedom in our city. But there are disparities in health, wealth, access, and privilege that impact Houstonians and challenge our collective resilience. While every Houstonian is needed to build a more resilient Houston, the actions we take to make Houston safer and stronger will need to prioritize identifying and addressing barriers to equity and inclusion for all. Does
Lynn,
that speak?
Lynn, can you
Yes.
pull that up on the screen so everyone can see it? That was the Houston's equity charge.
I'm sorry, it's the wrong.
No, it's not wrong. It's great that you read it. That's the what's in the Resilient Houston strategy. And then
Yes.
so people can see that that one's there. And then when you go to slide, I think it's 10, is where you then reiterate the commitment that the city has made in order to address the overall equity charge. And then our equity definition came after that. And then it was Houston's commitment.
Okay.
There's the commitment.
So let me read the equity indicators commitment. The City of Houston is committed to mobilizing all departments, divisions, and programs to review, revise, and implement systems providing for equity as defined above. The definition. In order to ensure limitless choices, opportunities, and freedoms, we will invest and support historically underserved and marginalized communities, such as people of color, people with disabilities, people with low incomes, immigrants and refugees, youth, and those with limited English proficiency. This commitment includes the provision of the amount of goods, services, supports, and resources specifically required to accomplish the equity goals in the City of Houston. In doing so, we will meet our vision as a city to offer opportunity for all and fully celebrate our diversity of people, economy, culture, and places. Thank you for that, Director Buggs. Paul, does that address your question? And does that address your question in a way that you feel would be appropriate for Houston?
It addresses the question, but you're going to deal with the definition a lot more so than you're going to show this long commitment. And so you probably should be saying the same thing in every place.
Yes. Would you like to make a recommendation, or we can take that into advisement into addressing this after this meeting?
So that we can continue the meeting, we probably should move forward. We can all, as long as there is a commitment to addressing it.
Yes, and the next step in our agenda today is to discuss the definition, and we're open to make recommendations and consider comments about the definition. And if you can excuse me just 1 second, I am going to copy this, the equity definition as we've drafted it onto this page so that you can see the notes as we're taking notes based on what you're saying today.
Lynn? Lynn, we've
Yes.
had a hand up for a while, so before we start that discussion, Mary Ann Piacentini, I don't know if I got the name right, sorry.
No, you didn't. It's Mary Ann Piacentini with the Katy Perry Conservancy. Thanks for inviting me. Hey, Lynn. I just wanted to know why in the definition, and I see it in the commitment, but why in the definition you didn't include gender or gender identity, which is a major class. And it seems to me that I understand, I appreciate why you don't want it to be super long, but it's totally left out. And it just does seem that there are people who do not achieve equity because of their gender or their gender identity.
And Devontae is capturing your comments. And I will have them back on the screen in just a second.
And Diana says in the chat that I would also add class as well. And while we're waiting, Carl is asking, can we get a copy of the presentations from today? And yes, we will make sure everybody gets a copy. It will also be posted on our Let's Talk Houston site.
And Devontae, can you make the text that you're typing a little larger? A larger font, please. Thank you. Okay. Were the last few comments captured in our notes about, yes, I see gender and class. Thank you. Are there other comments about our definition?
We have another comment in the chat from Jaime, who says, when you reference the city, are these indicators for the city of Houston and its operations specifically, or is the city about both city operations and broader community needs, resources, and processes?
That's a good question. Some of the sets of data that will be used in order to develop the score for the city of Houston will come from data sources like the Census Bureau. There are some sources that may come from the results of city operations. It will be a mix of different data sets. But it will be for the city of Houston. And the results of these, the themes and the topics and the scoring for the themes and the topics, we'll be able to use those to make policy recommendations. They may point to changes in existing programs. They may make recommendations to changes that would affect how services might be provided.
And Lynn, we have a question from Eileen Egan. She's got her hand up.
Hi. Listen, I think this is a really, really, really important discussion. And so I would really suggest that that you tell us the dates and times of these next 2 meetings now? Because frankly, a week out isn't always doable.
The date is set for January 7th. We
Yeah.
need to confirm the time, but totally understand and appreciate that comment. We will get that invitation out to you before the end of the week.
Okay, for both meetings?
Definitely for January 7th, and we'll need to look at availability for the following meeting.
Okay, because it just gets really, really tight scheduling. I was actually going to be on time off this afternoon. So, you know, and I see by the list, it looks like we missed some folks that may be out on vacation and stuff already. But getting, you know, that kind of comes back to equity and access and that kind of stuff. If you don't have enough notice, you can't make it.
Yes. One great thing about this process is we will have a survey available after this meeting within the next 2 days that will open up a survey on Let's Talk Houston for you to make additional comments about this definition. We do realize that everyone was not able to make the meeting today, and so we want to make every effort to allow all individuals on the stakeholder group to provide us comments.
And will that survey also include a communications plan in some detail?
We can add that to the website, yes. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Devontae is capturing another comment from Marianne. You referenced social class elsewhere, so you might want to make sure that you're consistent in the definition and your commitment, either using class or social class.
And Jennifer, I just wanted to reiterate based on, you know, the opening of this, we have a broad charge around equity. As Lynn read to everyone, that Houston's equity charge included many different attributes of folks. And that is where we talked about an individual's zip code, race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, social class, physical abilities or attributes, religious or ethical value system, national origin, linguistic ability, or immigrant status. We have city departments and divisions that are working on many of these aspects of this work, such as the Mayor's Office of People with Disabilities, such as the Office of New Americans in the Department of Neighborhoods. We have many ways that we have been working on the disparities around various issues. We have in the health department, the Harris County Area Agency on Aging. What we don't have is an entity that has been working specifically on racial and ethnic disparities. And so the factors that everyone is asking to be included in this equity definition that is taking its start from making sure that we are addressing racial and ethnic inequities is that all of those factors are compounding factors on what starts off with racial and ethnic bias. So I just wanted to reiterate that part of it, that through the lens of racial and social justice, we have been trying to shape a definition that allows us to deal with the overall issues that are compounded by all these other attributes as well. Okay.
Other comments about the definition?
Juan Sorto has his hand up.
Yes, it's not so much about a definition that I'm concerned about. It's more about the timeline, and given the fact that this is such a important topic to cover, and I'm just curious about the actual timeline. And if we can go to that screen, please, because I feel that the subject itself is not something that we can come up with, not necessarily a solution or even a strategy, but if you're saying that we have, before I can't, if we could go back to that timeline, which screen is that timeline so I can better explain myself. Okay, so we technically have 6 months or not we, but you know, the department has 6 months or so to come up with a definition, and I'm just curious, not a definition, but to address this issue. That's not enough time, and I'm just thinking of, and I can't say what is enough time to be exact, but I don't know how that messaging should be addressed as we try to engage stakeholders, because 6 months is not enough, but I don't know what's enough. So that's really where my whole, I guess, comments or questions are about, you know, our role. That is 6 months enough? And if so, what is it that we're trying to really accomplish, or what's the messaging? Because I personally don't think that's enough time.
Thank you, Juan. I will say this is an ongoing process. Part of the purpose for equity indicators is to look at the city over time, being able to see a snapshot of where we are today and compare that to data a year from now, 2 years from now. I believe that the data sets that we'll look at, the indicators, the themes, and the topics will be something that, one, if we take a snapshot today and we change a program today, the change in the community may take some time to show up. So some of the sets of data will need a 2-year time frame in order to analyze. Depending on the sets of data, it may take longer than 2 years for economic development to turn around in a community. That takes time, a lot of resources, funding availability, working with the community. And so just because we have the official launch in May, that is not the end of this project. That is just the beginning. So I think this is an iterative process that will go on for some time, and we will keep in touch with you, the stakeholders, over time period, and check back in with you for continued guidance in this process.
Lynn, this is Eileen. Let me ask a clarifying question. So what we're looking at in the timeline is the stakeholder engagement is this group that was invited for today's meeting. And the official launch will be the public facing general stakeholders component of this. Is that correct?
Yes, the public facing launch.
Okay, thanks. That may help Juan a little bit.
By the time we get to May, we should have sets of data online for people to look at, as well as the overall city equity indicator score. I mentioned that the indicators themselves will be rolled up to topics. The topics will be rolled into themes, and out of the scoring process, hopefully the city would get 100. I think that is our goal, to get at the best score that we possibly can get to. And so that score will be included in the official launch in May.
Thank you.
I'd like to go back to the definition. We've heard great comments about the definition itself. Are there any additional comments about Houston's commitment? And is this large enough for everyone to see on the screen? Great.
This is Ayana with Bayou City Waterkeeper, and I would just add that what Shannon, that clarifying point that Shannon added around the city kind of having a broad charge of equity and kind of how the lens in which this is launched from, and just kind of really focusing on around that race and ethnicity piece. It might be helpful just to include that in here, like just a line that this is, this is the focus, that there's already work being done around this because everyone's asking similar questions. The definition is already presented in this presentation, but many of our eyes went straight to many categories being omitted in this particular slide, although it was included in in the other slide, which had an expansive definition of equity. And so it would be helpful for us to be reminded that this project is specifically sort of mobilizing around race and ethnicity.
And is that captured in the statement? Equity is achieved when a Houstonian's race and ethnicity are the first two items that are listed, or would you like that to be highlighted even more?
It's helpful to be mindful that there's work being done citywide across departments. I guess what I'm saying is I'm just addressing the fact that many of us had questions and felt like things were being omitted, but for us to be reminded that this is the sort of landscape in what's happening around equity from different departments, and that this is specifically addressing this. So I'm not sure if that speaks to, if other people agree about that, but and maybe, maybe Shannon saying that just right now is clarifying enough. But I will say that was a really kind of crystallizing statement from her for me to understand the plan.
Thank you. I did see some head nods, but from my screen, I only see 9 heads. So I'm not sure if other individuals feel the same. I encourage you to either amen in the chat or raise your hand or give us a thumbs up so that we know that there are other people. I see a few thumbs ups. Thank you. Are there any other comments? And I see 2 hands.
Sean Haley.
Hi,
First of all,
Sean.
hey, everybody, good afternoon. And I did join a little late. I was wondering if you could scroll up, number one, on those notes that you have, because the first thing that came to mind, and I don't know if it was addressed. So I apologize if I repeat something. It looks like it wasn't. One thing in the definition that stood out for me right away, and something that worked with other Greater Houston area coalitions that are trying to nail some things down with health and healthcare, et cetera, is the definition seems to almost come from a deficit perspective. I'm wondering if we should think about saying what it is versus what it's not. So when I immediately see equity is achieved when, and then you get to, or sexual orientation does not predict their outcome. In the definitions of this nature, typically you want to state, or I would think we want to state what we want, not what we don't want, if that makes sense to you. So I was just trying to glance to see if that had been brought forward earlier, and I don't think it had been by those notes. But I think that's really critical in this type of work. Too often we'll point to what we don't want versus what we want. So some of it is just reframing, but it may cause a little tension in how that's reframed, or it may not. But that's the thing that stood out for me. Thanks.
Thank you. Well noted. I believe I saw another hand, if I remember correctly, Ayana.
I do not see any up. Anybody wants to jump in, please do.
And are there any questions about anything else that was presented today or about the process?
Lynn, if you can clarify once again for the group how everyone can send comments back, I think that might be helpful. I think people might need some time to, consider what we put in front of them today, and get back to us.
I will place in the chat the link to letstalkhouston.org. And that will be made available. If it is not already available, it will be made available after this meeting. That is letstalkhouston.gov/equity.
And is there a specific time frame by which you want to have comments back on this link?
The definition comments can be open through January, I believe the first day of the week is the 3rd. That way we can look at the comments prior to our January 7th meeting.
But everyone can still submit comments after, correct?
Yes, yes.
I just tried to use the link in the chat that you provided, but it says it doesn't work.
Okay. It will be made available by the end of the day. We just need to flip the switch to turn it on.
Okay.
Are there any other comments, suggestions, recommendations?
Lynn, this is Eileen. I'm looking at that website and it says this report is going to be in April. So y'all may need to update your website.
Thank you for that, Eileen.
Sure.
And the equity survey portion will be up and running by the end of the day.
Yeah. It's not as of right now, so.
Yes.
Okay.
I'll move on to the next slide. And please interrupt me or add any other comments or questions. But we've talked quite a bit about what the next steps are. That will be the January 7th stakeholder meeting. So I urge you to look in your email for the actual invite to that meeting. You should receive that by the end of this week. And at that meeting, we'll be able to summarize the comments that we've received so far about the equity definition, as well as do a deep dive into discussing the indicators and how they roll up into topics and how those topics roll up to themes and how that provides for the overall equity score for the city of Houston. At that January 7th meeting, we'd also like to talk to you about your role as an ambassador, helping us get the word out to the general public about the public survey, getting their comments on the indicators as well. I mentioned the history, the storytelling, the timeline. We'd like your recommendations and guidance on individuals that would be important for us to capture on the website in terms of Houston's history as it relates to equity. And we will make the survey regarding the indicators available to you after the January 7th meeting. So like we did today, we'd like to discuss the indicators in the meeting, answer whatever questions you have. We'll take notes about those recommendations and make a survey available to you so that you can provide additional comments. You may want to take that list home, go study it overnight, and think about additional comments that you'd like to send to us. At the end of January, all of the comments will be rolled into a final survey that will be made public and available to the public. Are there any other questions or comments? Any comments from the staff, either Director Buggs, Chief Zachariah, Jennifer Oslin, Devante, or Kinder? I believe I can't see the whole list of who's still on the line.
This is Margaret Wallace Brown. I just want to thank everybody for the considered and very thoughtful responses today. This is helpful to us. Thank you very much for your participation.
And if there are no other comments, we can end the meeting and give you back some time for the rest of the day to provide us comments or work on any other work that you might like to work on.
Lynn, when will the presentation be made available to us?
We'll get that online by tomorrow. We can upload the PowerPoint and that should be available tomorrow. It may take us a day or two, but unless we hear from someone that may not like their video made available, we could make the video available to the stakeholders that we've invited to this meeting.
And can you shoot us an email when it's posted?
Yes, we will do
Okay.
that.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate your comments and your participation and look forward to speaking with you soon. And have a good afternoon.
You too, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks
Hey.
all.
Hi.
Happy holidays. Thanks, Bo, for saying that.
Yes.
On everybody. Good to see you.